Hi, everybody. Welcome to College, the podcast. I'm Matt Carpenter. I'll be joined today by my co-host, as always, Peggy Keough. And here's what we're going to hit on today. We're going to talk about the most recent Wall Street Journal article, which really focuses on a counter from the colleges. The Congress passed taxing endowments, and now colleges are responding to the Senate with a counter. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Even though this is a little stale, we're going to talk about Trump's plan to block Harvard from accepting international students. We kind of talk through our thoughts on that. And then we pick up where we left off last week and expand upon the 529 conversation, pros and cons, other options. And we also talk through some specific companies that are in this space that we are fans of. So thanks for listening. Okay, here we are, another week, Peggy. It's it's not officially summer, but we're into June here. So how we doing?
Not summer solstice yet. Summer solstice yet. There's in Seattle, this area of Seattle called Fremont, which is kind of funky. On the summer solstice, they have a nude biking parade, which I have attended. Some of the people in the parade are not the people you'd want to see on a bike naked, but it was still a fun thing to go to.
How did you look? I knew you were a confident woman, but I didn't know you were that.
I was not in the parade. I was viewing the parade. Bill and I went to the parade.
Kind of sounds like a hoot. Good for those people. Yeah.
Very Seattle.
Very Seattle. Yeah. To my knowledge, nothing like that in this neck of the woods, but I don't know. We have those neighborhoods here, certainly, and they're fun. All right, cool. So, again, same thing, plenty to talk about here. I think where we'll start is this Wall Street Journal article that appeared this week. And essentially, I'll let you talk through the specifics and we can kind of provide some of our opinions here. But essentially, this is a counter, the college's counter to this proposed reform on how endowments are going to be treated. And this is kind of a response from colleges. And if you want to talk us through some of the specifics, we can dig in a little bit.
Yeah. So there's a group of some of the wealthiest colleges that are going to get hit the hardest. And just as a reminder, we talked about this before, but this endowment tax, which is currently at 1.4% for colleges that have over $500,000 per student in their endowment. Now, what passed the House is this tiered taxing. So it's the top is 21%, 14%, 7%, and the 1.4%. So these are the colleges that would fall in the 21% bucket. So obviously a massive increase. Stanford, Yale, Princeton, Duke, Rice, and U Chicago right now, they're in this. They're calling themselves the Learn Alliance. And basically what they've put to the Senate, because remember the House passed it, so the Senate's now grappling with all the different parts of this bill, is to say in lieu of that, keep a 1.4% tax, but in lieu of that, we will take out an annual 5% distribution from our endowment, and those funds will be spent on student financial aid and teaching, which is awesome, right? That sounds amazing on its face. They'd still pay the tax they're used to paying, and these funds will get pulled. And you might think 5%, that's not a lot. It is. When you're looking at an endowment of $40 billion, that's a huge distribution. That's a lot of extra money. So it's again proposed to the Senate. We'll see how they respond. This article was yesterday. So this is a new thing, and there was no information about any feedback from the Senate. It's just too soon. I'm not surprised that they've proposed something. My take on this is, sounds great, but if this were to happen, there would need to be very strict oversight, in my opinion, accountability for these colleges. You pulled out your distribution, where did it go? And tracking to show this much went to need-based aid. If they give merit scholarships, which a lot of these colleges don't, that's not even applicable. How is this really going to where you're saying it's going? And how is it really improving teaching? So there would need to be, kind of some, in my opinion, some big brother government accountability, which the government is not great at that quite often. Money goes out and there's no metrics. There's nothing that shows, was it effectively spent and did we get the results on paper we want?
Yeah. Well, look, I take it as a good sign, right? Because I think we were kind of in agreement we stood behind the intention of taxing some of these endowments. Now, let's be clear, we're not talking about a ton of colleges here, right? This is kind of the colleges that have these huge war chests where it's really hard, I think, for us to be like, this is not a nonprofit institution, right? This is a hedge fund that doesn't pay taxes when we're sitting on billions and billions and billions of dollars. And, and I especially like this concept of, you can't have more than X dollar amount per student in your endowment without us taxing you, essentially, or us, without paying some type of penalty, whatever you want to call it, right? Because to me, now that makes those colleges financially incentivized to expand their classes, right? To admit more people. Right. Which I hope, and this, Peg, you always rail on this, and we're in complete agreement here. One of the biggest problems is this narrative that, like, the more people that you reject from your college, the better college you are. We only let in 4%. And again, we know that's such a game because all these colleges send brochures to all these kids, make them feel special. They apply, zero chance they're ever going to get in, and they get to put that on their admissions website and talk about it on their student tours and all this. And it creates such a trickle down effect, right? I mean, the thing is with these schools that are just such household names and have this incredible brand that they've built quite literally over centuries, all the colleges look to them, right? Just like colleges said, like, hey, if Harvard charges X amount and Princeton charges X amount, we should raise our prices for the perception that we're going to be better because we charge more and all this, right? So the trickle down effect is real in our ecosystem. So my hope is if we kind of change this narrative that, the more people we reject, the better we are. If we can flip that on its head and get colleges to be proud of the fact we're expanding our classes, more people are getting in, and we're making it, again, more accessible, more affordable, et cetera, et cetera. And then again, if the top dogs start doing it, there will be this, they're influential, right? There will be this trickle down effect that I think will allow other colleges to say, all right, if it's not cool to brag about how many people you reject, maybe we can follow along here. So obviously, again, we'll see what happens, but I'm liking the general direction this is going because the colleges didn't say we completely reject it. Right? They said, all right, we hear you. We can do a little something different, and this will be a little bit less painful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you're saying, the eventuality that could be a tough one, but and I would challenge everybody that's listening to us. Part of it is your perception of things, and you too, buddy, because I hear you with the Harvard crap all the time. I mean, it really is, everybody, you just got to embrace that the name of the school is not the main thing. It's really the fit for your child. It ultimately really is. So, but it's a tough one because, like you said, these schools have been, I mean, Jefferson, Adams went to some of these schools. I mean, they've been around for a while, right? They were 16 years old and just went, it wasn't super hard back then to go to Princeton, but yeah. And when test optional, it was always there. But then with COVID, it wrapped up, jumped considerably because kids couldn't go take tests, right? That just made it worse because then all these kids were like, well, I have great grades, but I'm bad on the SAT. So now I'm going to get in. I never would have applied. And it's like, that's a whole nother. Great grades aren't going to get you into a lot of schools, and not just these wealthy schools. It's all about who you are that helps get into these schools. Overall, we both agree. I mean, this is not a negative, and they're not just fighting it saying, how dare you, we don't want to pay any tax. They're countering.
Exactly.
And 5% of a giant endowment is a lot of money as long as it ends up really being tracked and happening. I think
I think it's an encouraging sign, right? It's an encouraging sign that
okay,
some change in the right direction, and so that's a positive update in my mind. Okay, now speaking of my boyfriends, the number one brand in the world, and even if you can't afford to go here, you go here, right, Peggy? Harvard.
No, the opposite.
Listen, this, given how fast news moves, specifically in our kind of ecosystem here over the past few months, especially, this is almost a little bit stale, but we haven't talked about it, and you and I don't think have even talked about it offline. But this deal that Harvard, what Trump said, that Harvard can no longer accept foreign students. Right now, it was essentially immediately blocked, and I guess right now it's in a little bit of a stalemate, if you will. But any knee-jerk reactions from you? What are your thoughts on this? Predictions? What do you think?
I'm not a lawyer, but I don't see how you can do this. It's just another one of the Trump's kind of, in my opinion, just let me throw tons of stuff at the wall, which is part of what he does. And the courts will do what the courts will do. So I don't think it's going to go anywhere. It's borderline ridiculous. I mean, it's
It's
just
an
and it just is. And most colleges, this is a cash cow for them, right? These international students come in not just at a Harvard, but at American universities, and we've got good education in this country and they want it. And some cultures buying brand, like for clothes, college, everything is massive, right? It's just part of their culture. So you went to an American university, that's brand, even if it's not one of the Ivies. And it's a way for them to bring in funds and smart kids and everything that can, in theory, help pay for the kids that are going to get a Pell Grant, and then they've got to supplement the rest. So international students, it's not a bad thing. It's good for Americans to be around kids that aren't from the USA, right? I mean, where we tend to be kind of insular as a country. We're big, and a lot of people can't afford to experience other cultures. Whereas, like in Europe, you just get on a train and you're in another culture. So there's positives of international students, obviously. And this is just this knee jerk,
yeah.
kind
I
of
mean,
idiotic stuff.
I'm totally with you. I think at the end of the day, it's a nothing burger. However, still think it has a meaningful. When I say a nothing burger, I mean it's not going to go through. But it still hurts our, again, to use that word, brand or perception of, like, one of our superpowers as a country is we attract
We were a
best and brightest.
melting pot, right? That's who we were.
And again, and that's like, if you're, especially when it comes to education or the arts, sports, right? If you're in almost any country, we are like the epicenter of it, right? And again, I'm probably giving us too much credit, but I don't think exaggerating too much. Like, if I've said, my wife works at MIT, right? And it's like, you walk around that building, it is so freaking diverse because you have the smartest people from Central America and the Middle East and Asia. It's quite literally the best and brightest of the world, and they all come here, right? We attract the best talent, and it's also and you said this too, it's a major import, right? It's meaningful not just to the colleges, to our economy at large. My boyfriend shared a statistic recently, Scotty G, obviously, but it was something like we import our revenue from international students that come to college here is more than we generate more revenue than we do exporting everything out of Hollywood. So all Netflix subscribers all over the world, all the American movies that make all that money that gets shown in every other country, and that's a huge number. Obviously, we generate more by attracting people to come to get educated, right? In our countries, it's a huge import. So to me, it's one of these things. It's like, it's such an overcorrection. To your point, it's definitely an emotional response. Harvard stood up for themselves. I think he had emotional response and said, "All right, let's take it to the mattress."
You think emotional, immature? It's just the MO of our current president. I mean, you could just predict it. I mean,
Well,
it's
look,
just he's a very easy guy to read, and this is what he does. But he's doing it as the world superpower leader, so it's a little bit nutty.
And it's frustrating because, like, I like when he inserted himself, or the administration did, for some of these campuses that didn't have an adult in the room and said, like, hey, you can't be, openly supporting terrorism and things like this. And, like, but again, huge overcorrection to the point where it's like, all right, now whatever. Now we're just cutting off our nose to spite our
And
face.
it's just then the judges are just kept busy in the courts, and it'll turn into whatever. But and also a negative that could come out of this, if you're an international student, I mean, it's becoming an arena here where it's kind of like, do I want it?
Exactly
So
right.
all of a sudden, I've got somebody banging on my door saying I'm this and that, and it's a little, I know we don't get into all the politics, but I mean, there's some crazy stuff going on in this country. So as a foreigner coming in, is it a safe place to be?
Well,
It's a little different.
and that's where I'm saying I think there's some still kind of dangerous negative repercussions that are real. To your point, exactly. Like, is it actually going to happen? No, it's not. But if I'm this brilliant, I don't know, Indian student or something that's deciding between going to Trinity in Dublin or Northwestern in the United States, right? I just might be like, I don't, it's a deterrent. Let's put it that way. It's a deterrent. It
Yeah.
doesn't give you
Yeah.
the fuzzies if you're deciding between going to, some of the best schools in the UK or Europe or wherever or here, right? And so I think there's a real possibility that we lose some great talent. These people
Oh
are going
yeah,
to
for sure. For
push our,
sure. The colleges lose revenue and we lose great talent and people that are gonna, do
push us
things
forward.
to impact the world. Yeah.
Exactly right. So
Yeah. Yeah.
figure it out, knucklehead. All right. Well, um, let's talk about kind of revisit. We started this conversation last week, and again, we could do these, all sorts of episodes around this. But I guess we're kind of, I guess, pleasantly surprised that people cared about hearing about this, nerd out a little bit on 529s. But why don't you just like kind of give a quick debrief for people that didn't tune in at all last week and maybe pick up where we left off. And then I have a couple thoughts.
Yeah. So we've gotten from our listeners and people in general, hey, this is the stuff we care about. So, we're all ears, right? So we were talking about saving for college, all this craziness and uncertainty. And then as Matt and I always say, control the controllables. Well, you can control how you spend your money and how you decide to save and how you decide to plan if you're fortunate enough to be able to put money aside. If you're not, you're not right now. We shared last week our personal journeys, and sometimes you don't have the funds to put aside. It's all good, but this is meant to just give you an overview of how this all works. If you're thinking about it or you're doing it and you're just like, I'm not really even sure that it just was like, do this, so I did it. I don't really understand it. So the IRS created college saving vehicles, and what's called the 529 is the most popular one. And you put money aside, you as the owner, whoever owns the money, sets up an account, they're the owner, and then there's a beneficiary, which is always the student. That's why you're setting it up. So who's ever going to go to college and use those funds, that's you set up the 529. So the big perks of this is that you get tax-free growth. So if you're fortunate enough, your child's in kindergarten and you get a big windfall and you can say, hey, I can take this $20,000 or $5,000 or whatever it is and stick it in a 529, it'll grow tax-free all the way to when you're taking it out. No taxes on that. And when you take it out, which typically you liquidate something, you take it out, you got capital gains, you're paying taxes. You never pay taxes as long as you spend it on what the IRS calls qualified higher education expenses. And I'll talk about those in a minute, what those are. Another perk of these accounts is if you live in a state that has state income tax, which is most states in the country, you could get a state income tax deduction for what you're saving. You will need to be in the plan for that state, but you could get a deduction. So that's a good thing. You get some tax savings if you don't use the whole balance in your 529, which most people do because they're not able to save the full amount in a 529. You can change the beneficiary to like your younger kid. So it's not, we can't spend it all, we're stuck. So, the biggest restriction of a 529 is that it has to be used for these qualified higher education expenses. If it's not, then you'll have to pay tax on the earnings because you lose that perk, and you'll pay a 10% penalty on the earnings. So not massive, but you get stung, right? So what are these qualified higher education expenses? It's what you probably would expect: tuition and fees, room and board, books, not travel though. And that's a weird one. It is what it is. It doesn't make a lot of sense. If you live in Maine, your child's going to school in Nebraska, you've got to fly them there. Of course, that's to go to college, but it is not part of the qualified higher education expenses. So just keep that in mind, because that's one that's kind of counterintuitive, and you
Peggy, let
wouldn't
me
think
break
so.
in and
Yeah,
confirm.
absolutely.
Room and board can also be off campus, correct? It's not necessarily on campus, right?
Yeah, and so that's what, freshman year, super easy, right? Your kid's in a dorm, you always pay the tuition and fees to the college. So that's an easy one. Your kids are in a dorm and you're paying for room and board, right? It's easy. Of some campuses, little colleges, a lot of times, you're living on campus all 4 years. Easy peasy, the bill's there. You can pull that from the 529. But like I think I shared last time, my son off campus starting sophomore year, my daughter junior, senior year. but they still have room and board. They're still in a house or they're in an apartment and they still have to eat, right? So you can still pull those funds. What you have to be careful is that the room portion, you have to go and look at the university's site or college's site and see in their cost of attendance, they're going to say tuition and fees, room and board. Say they say it's 18,000 and they'll break it down. You just got to find it. Maybe it's 9 and 9, maybe it's not. Whatever the breakdown is, you can't go over the room estimate that they have in the cost of attendance or the board of what you take out. So if you wanted to like rent a penthouse for your child, that would be over probably the room that's in the cost of attendance. So you have to be careful of that piece, because if you do that, then you're going to get, again, you could get penalized. And what I did, super easy, every year I just pulled up Indiana University, looked at their itemized cost of attendance, printed it, threw it in my tax file. So if I ever got audited, because remember, you can get audited for like 4 years after, I could prove, yeah, I took these distributions on my 529 and I didn't take more. Because my son lived in a house and it was a 12-month lease. I had to pay more than the room cost at IU. So I couldn't pull all that out. So that's it. That's a great point, Matt, that you can still do it, but paper trail is really important. Over document. I mean, I never got audited. I was lucky. So twins for, 8 of these, and I didn't get audited, but I did get a couple letters from the IRS saying, hey, you need to pay a penalty because you took this out. And then I talked to my CPA buddy. He said, just write them back, use this language. And I did. Boom, I'm done. So if you ever do get a letter, you just go to your accountant and just respond appropriately. I just had to show them, because what the colleges do is they send to the IRS what's called a 1098-T, like Tom, and it says, hey, this is what this student paid us. And so the IRS looks at that, and when you take money out of your 529, you will get what's called a 1099-Q, like Queen, and it's going to say, in this tax year, you took this much out in contributions, you took this much out in your gain, which is nice to see your gain and know you're not getting taxed. And so the IRS, in theory, is putting those together. And if they're not the same, that's when they can say, oh, you took too big a distribution, and then you just have to prove to them that you did have the qualified expenses. And like for board, I just had my kids, they each had a version of our credit card with their own number under the same umbrella. So I could see exactly what they spent. They had a budget. And then I just highlighted that portion of the bill every month. Again, threw it in my tax file. I made sure that it never would go over whatever the meal plan was that was part of the cost of attendance. So if you're not a big organized tracking person, you kind of got to go out of your comfort zone here and just track it, just
You're a
in
model
case.
student. You're a model student, Peggy. So let's talk about the savings component of 529 a little bit, which we touched on last week, and it's really flexible here, right? And it's you can either throw a lump sum at it sporadically, or you can do something more consistently. We talked a little bit last week. If you're somebody like me that doesn't have the same discipline as a Peggy, I'm just a huge proponent of forced savings plans, even if they're voluntary forced savings plans, like a 529 would be, for example, right? Like, I think in a perfect world, you say, hey, you know what? I could probably get away with stocking away $50 a week, $25, whatever that number is, right? You figure out what that is, and then you just have it automatically deducted from your checking account. And again, it never hits your checking account. It's just away somewhere, again, the same way as if you're contributing to a 401k, paying your mortgage, whatever it happens to be. It's that forced saving. So I think that's a great goal. If it's not possible, again, if you're in sales or you're a business owner and your income's really lumpy and you have to be sporadic with when you contribute, no problem. And another, and let's see how you do here, Peggy, with put your financial planner hat on. But another advantage to contributing consistently, again, maybe ideally on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, dollar cost averaging. Peggy, explain dollar cost averaging to us with your
Yeah, so what that is, it's just systematically saving. And what happens is when that money hits the account, it automatically gets purchased into whatever, and that's another conversation of the different options of what you can pick for how the funds are invested in your 529, but it just automatically buys in. So that's what you're doing if you're able to save in a 403b, 401k. It just pulls right out of your paycheck. It goes there. You've got this, this Fidelity fund, this Vanguard fund, and you say 50-50 in those, boom, it just buys. So if the market's down, you're buying those funds at a discount. You're getting more shares. The market's up, you're buying at a higher price, but it's just happening. And that's what dollar cost averaging is. So the idea is sometimes you're buying high, sometimes you're buying low. It's just automatically happening. So it's a great point that you make, Matt, because it's a pain to go, oh, I have a bunch of money, I'm going to go send it. It's just so much easier if you're more steady Eddie, and you like even start small, like Matt said, start with 25, $50 a month. Like sit down if you're married with your spouse and say, what can we do here that's not straining us so we can't even get a pizza, that kind of thing. But and just have it go. It's just kind of like paying the electric bill. It just goes and it's done. You don't have to do anything, and then you get this big advantage of dollar cost averaging on top of it, and then you can see the balance build, and it's a win-win. It's a
Yep,
win-win.
exactly. And just by default, you're not timing the market, right? I think most of us,
Yep. Nobody can time. It's time in the market, not timing the market. So.
exactly. And even if it's by, again, you're not purposely trying to time the market, but if you're going lump sum, you just have you are timing the market accidentally, and maybe you get lucky and you're buying a dip or whatever. But again, you don't have to rely on, if you're dollar cost averaging consistently, just always contributing. Okay, Peggy, just kind of curious here, and again, we haven't talked about this offline, but if you were being a devil's advocate against 529s, and again, maybe the answer is you don't have any. Like, what are some of the things that come to mind?
Well, the biggest negative, if you will, is it's restricted. So you have to use it for qualified higher education expenses, right? And that's clearly defined by the IRS. So like I said, travel isn't an option. So some people, there are certain, like you can take 10,000 out if your child's in private school, like yours is, Matt. You can take that out once a year, and you can take out 10,000 one time for student loans. But you can't say, oh, we have a bunch of student loans, I want to take 20,000. You can't do that. So there are restrictions, whereas there's other types of, there's a custodial account that you put it, it's a gift to the minor, and then all it needs to be spent on is for the benefit of that minor. So it could be a pair of sneakers, it could be college, it could be anything. So that's a little bit of the downside. Also, this doesn't happen very often, but if you oversave, then you might have, if you say you have an only child and you end up amassing a huge sum of money and you just have nobody to spend it on. But that's pretty rare, and that can kind of be avoided unless you put this massive lump sum and it sits there for 18 years and the market just goes crazy, So that's the biggest negative, if you will, or difference between, I know a lot of people work for Facebook, Microsoft, to say, yeah, I'm getting my stock and I'm just going to earmark it. That's great. Just you don't have the tax savings that you have on a 529. So it's a win if you're going to save, this money is going to be allocated for this. And especially if you're in a slightly higher tax bracket, every little bit helps to not have, mutual funds are not good on the tax front. There's capital gains distributions every year, even if your portfolio is dropped, and then you're paying tax on that. You could get bumped into the next tax bracket. That's the nice thing about 529s. But a question I get a lot, and I'm sure you do too, Matt, like, oh, well, my kid's a junior in high school, should I start one now? You can, but the big advantage, like I've said, is this tax-free growth. And so if your child's about to go to college, you're going to start taking distributions. So you really don't have a lot of time for that. But I will say, if your state has some nice deductions, you should look into it. But there are a lot of moving pieces here, and some states, like when I talked about the 10,000 being pulled out for different things, you have to check with your state, because if a given state says, yeah, that's nice, the federal government says that, but we don't, it doesn't work for us, you could get penalized at that level. So there is a little research, and just very high level, if it's like, well, what 529 should I pick? Most states have them, and you don't have to pick your state. If you have the state income tax, you might want to look into, are there perks there? If there's not, or like I lived in Texas and then Washington before moving to Arizona, well, no state income tax. So there was that wasn't even a thing. So I looked at the universe of 529s, and that's a little overwhelming because there's tons of states, obviously, but there's no restrictions on where you can open it. So that's a nice thing too. It's not like you have to do it in your state if you don't like the plan, it's expensive or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, complete agreement. I think the biggest quote unquote risk is like, hey, what if, so my brother, right? So my nephew's got a 6 month old, right? Miles Duncan. He's been starting to, just bend my ear a little bit, get some, start to learn about this stuff, which is, insane to think of with a freaking 6 month old. But I know his wife's saying, talk to your brother about that's where that's coming from. But anyways, that's kind of one of the things that I said. I said, yeah, hey, here's what the 529s look like. Here's the pros and cons and whatever. But what if Miles, just, and again, it's especially interesting now is that I think we kind of see a little bit of a shifting trend where there might just be less people that are going off to college, right? Because it's not for everybody. It's cost prohibitive, and I think we're starting to destigmatize, being in the trades a little bit in a positive way, to say that's go have an amazing life as an electrician or a welder or plumber, whatever it happens to be. So that's the big one, is like, you get a 6 month old, who freaking knows what's going to be the best path for them, right? A couple other comments here. Number one, just make sure this usually happens automatically, but sometimes we hear people say, well, oh my God, the market, went way downhill and my 529 got smoked, and that's terrible because my kid's going to college next year. That tells me that they are not in really, because most of these are set up where if my brother opens up a 529, next week for a 6 month old, he's going to be invested very aggressively because he's got 18 months to ride the wave, right?
Yeah, and years.
Yeah, 18 years to ride the wave here, right? Where typically these are automatically set up where each year we get closer to college, we're more and more conservative. And by the time we're in junior, senior year of high school, we're almost mostly in cash and money markets and just like, again, very conservative instruments depending on our, risk tolerance. But you got to make sure that you're set up that way, because if you're like in 90% equities when your kid's a junior or senior, that doesn't make sense with the time horizon for when you're going to be, accessing that money. So again, just make sure, usually it's set up that way, but sometimes we hear, and it just, my alarm bells go off, say, well, how could you be aggressive, investing?
Yeah, look at the details of the target fund. I'm not a huge fan of those, not necessarily in 529s, but in general, because I don't know if anybody was paying attention in '08 when everything collapsed, and a lot of people were in those type of funds for retirement, and they were shocked at how much their portfolio plummeted. And when they went to look at the nuts and bolts of it, they might have had a 25% stake in equities and some emerging, and all of a sudden it was like, whoa. So it's on all of us as investors, even though there's a bucket and it says it's conservative, look at the underlying funds, and not as much the funds, but the allocation. The allocation is what really matters. How much of it is in fixed income? How much of it is in cash? What does it look like when my kid's a senior in high school? And if you don't like the equity exposure, most plans you can go into, and then you can say, I want this chunk to be all fixed income, or like money market kind of cash, which now you probably earn 3.5%, not the end of the world. And at least it's there. So you can make investment changes. You can't do it every other day. They have different rules of when you can. I think it's twice a calendar year now, because when the market tanked, people went crazy and they increased it. But I'd have to look that up to be sure. But yeah, that's a good point. The allocation really does matter. If you have a financial advisor, they might tell you, hey, I've got some plans and I will pick the allocation and I will track it. You always want to ask about what that's going to cost you. because there are funds out there called load funds, and you're going to pay either an upfront or a back end percentage to be in that because the advisor needs to get paid to do their work for you. There's a lot of other plans where you just go direct as a retail person, and it's like Vanguard and low fees, and you just put it in there. And to your point, if your brother does it, Matt, it's like pretty aggressive, and you just forget about it, and it grows as Miles gets older.
Yeah.
It'll go up and down, but overall, if you're looking at past performance, it should do pretty well.
And I think this is a more antiquated argument kind of against 529s, but a lot of financial advisors, planners, et cetera, used to say, I don't like funds because the funds stink. They're in these cookie cutter mutual funds, and I can get a lot more sophisticated and have access to, different investments elsewhere. Again, I think that's antiquated, that there's more and more, I guess, flexibility with exactly how these 520 and where these funds can be invested. Most of the major institutions, offer these, and a bunch of different states have pretty good programs. And again, you can invest in a state's program even if you're not a state resident there. And so that's a good place to get yourself educated. A quick plug that I'll give, or I guess two plugs. I like, and by the way, these are we're not being endorsed or paid for this or whatever. This is just one man's opinion here, but I like the Saving for College platform. They're kind of friends of ours, so to speak, but they're more of a shopping center, I guess, right? So hey, here's all these different 529s and the pros and cons of each, and here's your state's plan and tax rules, and so it's a again, they certainly get paid by the financial institutions and all that, and they're incentivized to help sell 529s, but I like how they do it, right? It's more of a shopping education conglomerate or whatever.
Yeah, it's nice, and you can pick 3 or 4, and they'll do a side by side for you, like fees. And so it's really easy to kind of see what are the key differences, So yeah, it is a good site, and they'll come out best 529s for expenses, best 529 for performance, So it's a good site to go check out, savingforcollege.com for sure.
Another interesting one is, and again, I just kind of like these I don't know, human beings, but I also like their business model. But it's interesting. I don't know it as well as Saving for College, but it's the private 529 plan. And what this is that basically, and not every college participates, but they have a decent amount, a few hundred colleges, as you would expect, where basically it locks in your inflation, right? Inflation is one of the biggest challenges with college getting expensive every year. But if you get into a 529 and your kid ends up going to one of these private colleges, essentially you're keeping up with inflation. Like that's how your money will accumulate. And then even if they don't, let's say they end up going to a state school, you're locked in. I forget the exact percentage here, so don't quote me. But it's like at 2 or 3%. So if you end up not going to one of those schools, it's not like you get screwed. It didn't grow the same way that if you went to one of the participating colleges. So obviously the huge risk there is that they don't go to one of these private colleges.
And they tend to be the more selective, harder to get in schools, right. And they might not be a good fit for your child. Yeah, that one that's the concept of like prepaid tuition. Like that was I did that with my 2 in the state of Washington, and it was a massive win because, as we know, tuition kept going up, and that was my rate of return. I had no market risk. I had a 529 and that. But then when 2008 happened, a lot of these prepaid plans just blew up because they had to be invested in the market to pay out the current kids that were going to college. Their portfolios plummeted, and they couldn't keep up. And a lot of the plans closed down. And in the state of Washington, they froze it, and then they revamped it and said, no, we're not tying this to University of Washington and how much they raise tuition. We're not going to let them raise tuition. Literally, Matt, it was this wonderful thing. Okay. Tuition went up 15%. My get, which is what they called it, went up 15%, and the market was just plummeting. I mean, I looked like a genius, and I was like, some of my clients were like, this is great. And I was like, you know what? It's great, but sometimes things just align, and I did not foresee that downturn, but it worked out great. But it's just a different world now with those. But private 529 is similar, except it's more restrictive because it's like this school, these group of schools. And so you want to do your homework, do your due diligence before you go into that one. And like Matt said, you can go to other schools, but then your growth if you lock in Columbia now, although Columbia is extremely expensive, and actually, as we're talking through this, Matt, like, who knows what's going to happen? Like you keep
Of
saying,
course.
maybe this is going to stop them from raising, maybe they're going to bring in more kids. Like maybe things will start ticking down a little. Then you're in a plan like that, and it's terrible because you're banking on tuition keep going up and up because that's your rate of return, your
Exactly.
tax-free rate of return.
And those are just two, right? That like, again, not
Just
you know,
something to look at.
exactly, something to look at. I trust the people there, and so that's something to think about. Last thing I'll just kind of end on, when I'm playing again, kind of devil's advocate with finance. I really like Roth IRAs here as a solution because, again, you can invest in anything and you get the tax benefits if you choose to use it for college for your kids. If they don't go to college, you don't have you're not penalized or anything like that. Now, you can only have access to those if your household income is below a certain threshold. So not everybody has the option to even set up a Roth IRA. But for me, it has a lot of the same benefits with some additional kind of, flexibility there. So
There's flexibility. I mean, I would just a couple things there, and my feedback or my
your favorite.
comments. I love Ross. I mean, I've been doing them forever because it's tax free, and then it's tax free distributions for retirement. When you take money out for college, you have to be really careful how you do it and what you're taking out. And if you're getting need based aid, there has to be planning there because that can hurt your need based aid if you're getting it. So you've got to be fairly forward thinking, talk to a professional, and make sure you understand all that. And I will also share, not to have people's heads spin. You're totally right, Matt, that there's just like the IRS all the time. It's like you can do it if your income's up to this, but there is something called a backdoor Roth, and that's what I've been doing for over a decade. And I won't go into it, but just write that down.
Okay.
If your
What's
income is
okay.
over that,
We're gonna have
and
to come
you
back and talk about the back.
yeah, that's a way to get money into a Roth, even if your income's over the amount. And then if you're doing it for college, then you have it, to Matt's point.
Yeah. All right. Well, very interesting. We'll end on that cliffhanger. But Peggy, have a awesome rest of your day, everybody. If you like us, please follow us. Please share us. And
Yes, please. Yeah. Share us with the world.
special guest next week.
Special guest near and dear to my heart. So
Special guest next week. So
tune in. All right. Bye, everybody.
Okay, thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, please like us, please follow, please share with your friends. I'm host Matt Carpenter. I was joined by co-host Peggy Keough today. Today's episode, as always, was produced and edited by Eileen Campbell. Thanks, and come see us next week.